So we've had four stimulating talks, and hopefully they've been able to kind of seep in and ruminate a little bit. And perhaps as you've had a chance to digest some of these talks, oh, gee, I wish I would have asked the following question. So I'm going to ask, we due to other callings, we lost Mark Morvant, but I'm going to ask our other three speakers from this afternoon to join me up here. We've got about 15 minutes or so. And I want to just throw this open again to questions as you've had a chance to think about something and, oh, wish I would have asked. Now's your opportunity to do that. So Heather, Michael, and Jennifer, would you join me up here? And I wonder if we could get a mic or two as well. Well, I'm one. I see a question in the back. Sheila?
Thank you. I want to tell all the speakers and the organizers this has been wonderful. I've enjoyed all of the presentations and I've learned quite a bit. I think the one thing that scares me the most about what I heard today was the fact, I can't remember which speaker was talking about Elsevier and the big publishers are all thinking about going open access. I think they said open access is the future. And I'm worried about, I don't think they're going to give up their profits. So what is their version of open access and how is that different from what we're hearing?
So I'll start this one and you guys definitely chime in. So the world of open access, is this on? Yeah, okay, sorry, I feel like a lounge singer with these things. It's like, I feel like I should get up and start dancing a little bit. You don't need to see that. Okay, so less disturbing is Elsevier. Their version of open access, I think, is a scary environment for two reasons. One is the financial incentive for them to reduce their profits is non-existent. So the calculation that they are making and many of the large commercial publishers are making is to kind of do this very simple calculation. They need a certain amount of revenue per article, or they're making a certain amount of revenue per article in the subscription access world to achieve their current profit margins. So the calculation that they're making is we're going to preserve the amount of revenue and profit margin that's baked into the system by moving to an article processing calculation that basically says we publish X amount of articles per year and we need X amount of revenue in order to hit these profit margins. We'll divide one by the other, and that's the charge per article. They've landed on the number of roughly $3,000 an article across the board in order to achieve those profit margins. So one of the scenarios that's a little bit frightening is watching the commercial publishers try to bake that number in as a given to the community. Where we have the advantage and where it's a little, there's a possibility for us to actually affect a difference in their approach in a way that we can't do in the subscription market, is that they're leaving out the one difference the one piece of leverage that we have, which is they have to compete for authors who are willing to pay $3,000 an article or more. Whereas librarians right now are being sold big bundles where they're not competing on price with librarians, but they're going to have to compete on price with the individual, with article processing fees. The other piece of the scenario, and then I think Mike wants to add some stuff to this, is again that licensing piece. They're going to call it open access, but it's not going to look like a full CC BY license that's attached to the articles. So for me, those are the two pieces, and as Mike just explained, that's another place where authors have leverage and where we as the community have leverage to not accept those terms and conditions on the articles.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything. And we're seeing the test case in the United Kingdom. There was a recent decision where the government reviewed open access and thought that the US government approach of this sort of public access, read-only access, was insufficient. They liked the idea of, the reuse rights, but then decided, we're going to just pay for it. The government's going to pay for it. And then the question is, at what price? And this is where we're seeing the publisher saying, fine, if you're going to guarantee us our current level of revenues, I guess we could switch our model, but there's no reason the price of an article needs to stay at $3,000. And so that is one of the key points. But the other is trying to create these value-added services, and the text mining services and the analytics and all of that will be a hobbled version of what they could be in an open access environment. So that's the other issue.
I want to follow on with that. I see the same kind of picture from where I sit, which is publishers with vast amounts of revenues, such as Elsevier, being able to really invest in a level of sort of usability above what one is reading, and so things that really on top of that provide some value in terms of a larger ecosystem. And so my question, kind of seeing that beginning to take shape and understanding that business models will have to change, my question is to Jennifer about how PLOS is thinking and how this community can engage with you in that very competitive environment, in that I'm going to guess you don't have the R&D funds available to take on a multi-billion-dollar company or several multi-billion-dollar companies. So how can this community engage with you creatively in a way that enables you and those publishers really trying to work in this arena to kind of compete in the next game, the one coming?
That is a very good question. And you're right, we don't have the R&D funds that, say, Elsevier or some of the larger mammoth Leviathan ones may have. The way that we go about doing so is we try to partner with other small innovators. So Figshare is one example. We recently was able to integrate our PLOS supplemental information files with the organization called Figshare. I guess if you're not familiar with them, they're an open repository of figures of all kinds. They take format files ranging from tables, CSV files, all the way to code and PDF and images and so forth. But everything there is open access, and it's a fantastic new outfit that is based out of London. So by partnerships on that level, we're able to continue to build out these services. We do, in fact, just to take a step back, we do, in fact, face some of the author APC charge, I think, competition that will more likely be increasingly steep in the future. So as Heather mentioned, if subscription costs are no longer part of the equation for companies to generate revenue, what will it move to? ABCs are just one example, but the hope there is that there will become a market for other processing charges. There are a number of independent researchers who have put out and have done actually cross-publishing studies of the different journals and their author processing charges, and they've also tacked along with it some of the more traditional metrics for how research will fare if you publish with that publisher. So, I think researchers, and rightly so, they should become more informed as to what they're paying for. This is not well put because, again, it's a misnomer, a misconceptualization to really think of it as an author charge. But in the sense that the burden of that fee will be on the researcher, perhaps shouldered by the funding agency and so forth. I think some of these examinations, in fact, will be quite revealing. And I think in the long term, more information and more insight into this is better.
If I could just add to that. So the idea of article processing fees as a competitive market is, the hope, right? So one of the things that Spark is working on for the librarians in the audience is actually a joint project with PLOS to do an examination of the article processing charges that are out there to get, basically we're going to paint an environmental scan to take a look at what's out there, and then to do a little bit of projecting in terms of the behavior that we see coming from commercial publishers. So the commercial publisher's success in our marketplace came from, in the online environment, bundling together your subscription dollars for multiple journals into one pot of money. They are already attempting to do that with article processing fees for open access journals. Coming soon to a negotiating table near you is your friendly international publisher who is going to ask you to consider ponying up a significant amount of money up front for a discount, but essentially bundling your APC fees, paying in advance for a 20, 30% discount across the board on APCs, but you will then be committing a priori a significant chunk of your money that can fund open access publishing and other outlets to the commercial publishers once again. Buyer beware. This is something that we're going to have to be very, very conscious as a community, not to fall in the trap because we know how to do it. We know how to negotiate subscriptions or bundles. Because it feels familiar doesn't mean it's the right path to go down in this environment. So that's one way that I think PLOS, Spark, OASPA, all the other publishers who are out there who are not-for-profit publishers and interested in a competitive marketplace in open access can really collaborate by talking to one another and being conscious of those buying behaviors.
I have a question for you, Heather, because you have more of a view into this, and perhaps you could share a little bit of insight as to whether or not there are already movements or you anticipate there being some backdoor collusion in price setting. I mean, I don't know, that's what happens in other markets.
I don't know if collusion, well, it's a strong word, but I mean, there's certainly an understanding on, I think, the commercial publisher's part. They know how to sell to our market, and they know what our behavior is. They know, I can't remember, I think it was our person who's not here who I had a question for, Mark, talked about reducing the friction to make it easier. And one of the reasons that people stick with commercial textbook publishers is that it's easier to actually buy the product rather than to go to the open product. And I think in purchasing or payments for APCs, that kind of a friction thing still applies. So whether it's deliberate and collusive, I would hate to speculate, but I wouldn't be. I would be on the lookout for that type of OPEC-like behavior is a lovely way to put it.
I had a question for Jennifer about the ALM with regard to the use of Twitter and Facebook and things like that. Are you tracking back the originating tweet, to determine, or maybe that too, because what I was really getting at is with regard to citation information, they're excluding self-citing and things like that. What are you doing in the gathering of that kind of data to exclude people who might start their own popularity with
Thank you for the question.
tweets?
It touches on a big concern that is quite widespread amongst all people that we speak to about article metrics when we speak specifically about some of these social media sources. So for Twitter, there are two potential huge problems. One is that it can be gamed. I think it's perhaps another way that your question may be framed. And a second one is that we don't have a very good sense right now as to who is in fact engaging in the Twitter conversation. And so unlike citations, whereby only other researchers who are publishing papers are engaging, are the de facto community that are involved in this activity, Twitter is an open public platform, right? And we're in the very beginning of developing the sophistication of this particular technology. We hope to, in fact, be able to give far more granular view as to whether or not this particular set of tweets may have come from researchers whose IPs are from a research institution versus that of tweets that have come from the general public. And I do mean to still include this latter group because depending on who you are and depending on what you're looking for, you may very well, in fact, want to surface stories that have become more widespread, popular within the general population. Altmetric.com, which is one of the entities that I mentioned earlier, they have started, they are far more advanced in being able to give a better sense as to where these tweets are coming from. And I definitely recommend you checking them out. It's just altmetric.com. And so I think between all of the data aggregation providers that including us, these are all things that we're thinking about and trying to build out better tools for. Just to quickly wrap this comment up, on the note of gaming or self-initiated elevated activity that may be able to promote one researcher's interests over that of the general welfare. That is definitely one of the issues, and we think that like citations, which also can be gamed too, that it will require a whole set of processes and that on behalf of the data providers, certain particular gates or considerations that they take into account, when they process their data. It will also involve, I think, the establishment of community norms of what is appropriate behavior when you're engaging with research that is captured and tracked in a certain way. We do feel that, insofar as it could potentially be used for research assessment, for hiring, tenure, promotion, and so forth, that these are all very important kind of considerations, and that like something, say, like plagiarism, that there needs to be some sort of larger behavioral norm that is set up and also policed by the community at large along these lines. So it will take multiple efforts along different lines to really address this issue, but it is certainly a legitimate and valid one.
I'm Mark Greenberg from the University of Kansas. I'm glad that you mentioned that citations too can be gamed, because I was going to make that comment as well. In fact, that was brought up at Berlin 10, that citation itself isn't very good, necessarily the best way of measuring, in part because of that. But what I wanted to do is return to the question of APCs or APRs, which is a problem that a couple of colleagues and I have been working on at KU. That is, I'd like to encourage everybody to think about the problem of shifting the costs of publication, not just in a first world framework, but also in a global framework. We can probably figure out how to pay our charges, and I know that PLOS has this mechanism for waiving the fees for, I think, 90 countries or so that are below a certain level. But it still ends up being a barrier to participation in global scientific communication, because there are psychological barriers asking for the waiver. People don't want to do it. It's embarrassing. It's a kind of colonial model that people don't want to engage in. In fact, just as I was sitting here today, I got the notice that the article that the three of us, Town Peterson at KU, Emmett and I have written, Town works on global issues of evolutionary biology and ecology, works with working groups in Africa and South America and so forth. And he's constantly engaged in these conversations. He's brought a lot of this data to the table. And I work in Eastern Europe, where we have the same kinds of problems. So it ends up ghettoizing a number of constituencies. What we want to do is think about not just the 14-year-old boy who is the mind we want to capture to bring all the best minds to the table for our problems, but also our colleagues in other parts of the world who can engage in creative strategies to solve scientific problems.
I agree completely that access to publishing should be democratized, but you've got the problem in the developing world just on the other side, right, where readers are denied access because of cost barriers. So somebody's going to get denied unless some subsidy is made, because somebody's got to bear the cost of publication. I think the hope is, in a world dominated by article processing charges, that competition will drive those down so that access barrier is easier to manage than the price barrier on the reader's side. So, it's not a perfect world. Your point's well taken. And managing the sort of neo-colonial optics is is an essential part, because I think certainly folks at PLOS and others, really do have a democratic ethic about what the academy is and should be. But figuring out how you allocate the costs and how you identify where the subsidies come from is an evolving area.
A quick point, and I hope that this is relevant, but we had a PLOS article published last year, and this was done by a set of researchers who were not affiliated formally with a research institution. They were all trained researchers by their own right, but they were not working. They are not currently working within a research institution. So I don't know if you want to call this citizen science, whatever. But what they did was they did the research, and then they created a Kickstarter campaign. And so the crowdsourced, it was funded through crowdsourced means. And this is one example, and perhaps it is a very rare one, or perhaps it will never occur again. But I'm seeing a lot of very exciting things happening in the realm of creating alternative ways in which to fund science itself. That is its own, the state of funding for sciences is an entire own, bag of worms or can of worms that is in very difficult straits at the moment. As it relates to publishing, I think there may be some crossover insofar as there are new and previously unimagined ways in which this money was coming together and magically appearing. I don't know whether or not this means that there's an opportunity in the future for the funding of science and the funding of the publishing of science to be as much of a philanthropic effort as, say, it is the New York Philharmonic or the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And perhaps there is room, in fact, for future NGOs, in fact, that are dedicated to raising money for international funding of science as well as the publishing of the science.
I like ending on that very optimistic note. I want to ask you to join me in thanking our speakers today. I want to just plant the seed. Tomorrow we'll be starting promptly at 9. One of the things that we want to do is sort of turn the corner here and begin to take this conversation in the direction of asking, so what can we do here in Oklahoma? How can we implement some of these ideas in Oklahoma? What do we need to do, both at OU and OSU, to move forward in this space? We'll begin with a continental breakfast, I believe about 8:30 in the morning, so if you arrive early, there'll be something to sustain you until we get started. And I suggest now it might be appropriate to step next door where we might lubricate our throats and enjoy one another's company. Thanks for joining me today.